Elsewhere, mourners gathered yesterday for the burial of a Ukrainian fighter pilot who was killed when his F-16 fighter jet crashed on Monday as Russia launched a major missile attack on Ukraine. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry has opened up an investigation into the crash. And yesterday, Russia launched another heavy aerial attack into Ukraine, the third in 4 days. The Ukrainian Air Force says most of those missiles and drones were intercepted. Joining me now, NBC News correspondent Erin McLaughlin, who is in Kyiv for us. So, Erin, what is the latest on this F-16 crash investigation? Do we know what happened there?
You know, Ryan, we don't. It is a mystery. This is what we do know. We know that this happened on Monday in the midst of that massive Russian missile strike on Ukraine, one of the largest of this war. More than 100 missiles and more than 100 drones were fired on Ukrainian territory. We know from President Zelensky that the F-16s were a big part, played a big role in repelling some of those attacks. A famed Ukrainian pilot by the name of call sign of Moonfish was involved in that effort. He was flying an F-16, according to Ukrainian officials. He had just shot down 3 missiles and a Russian drone. He was on his way to the next target, and suddenly they lost communication with him. His plane crashed, and he died along with the plane. Now they've announced this big investigation. They're bringing in the United States to help in that effort to figure out exactly what happened, because it stands now there's a lot of questions and a lot of rumors here about this in Ukraine. Ryan.
And Erin, it's also been weeks of cross-border fighting between Ukraine and Russia, with Ukraine reportedly gaining some ground in Russia's Kursk territory. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's right, Ryan. The Ukrainian authorities also announced additional gains made there in Kursk. They continue to dig into that Russian territory. Meanwhile, the Russians continue to make gains in Ukraine's eastern Donbass region, getting closer and closer to the key city of Pokrovsk, really seen as critical to the Ukrainian front line and its efforts to getting in supplies and their own reinforcements there in the Donbass. It was described to me, this scenario has been described to me by a Western intelligence official as a game of who blinks first. Neither side at this point can really afford to be carrying out these offensives. Nevertheless, they persist. I was speaking to one Ukrainian military analyst who was telling me that the longer Putin leaves the situation in Kursk, with the Ukrainians digging in, the longer it takes for him to move a substantial amount of Russian forces into that area to reclaim Russian territory, the more difficult it's going to be for Putin to get back that Russian land. So, you know, really all eyes on these sort of 2 offensives at this point. No one really knows what's going to happen next. Ryan.
Okay. Erin McLaughlin, thank you so much for that. Let's turn now to the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, Admiral James Stavridis. Admiral, it's been more than 3 weeks since Ukrainian troops crossed into Russia. Should we expect a stronger push from Vladimir Putin to stop them at some point?
Absolutely. And it's high risk in that sense, Ryan. Think of it this way. This, in military speak, is called a salient, which is simply a peninsula of terrain you've captured driving into an opponent's territory. The good news is, as you occupy that salient, think of the top of a sorcerer's hat. You occupy that salient, you can go left, you can go right, you can keep going straight. The bad news is, and this is your question, Putin can surround it, potentially cut it off, trap thousands of Ukrainian troops in place. So I think what we're going to see is the Ukrainians digging in hard so that they have control of this salient and can repel. In other words, I think it's unlikely that they're going to continue this offensive in an aggressive way, but they do want to hold that terrain, not so much for the battlefield, Ryan, but ultimately for the negotiating table.
And we're seeing some heavy aerial attacks on Ukraine in civilian areas. And this is something that Putin did in the very beginning of this war as well, to kind of break the will of the Ukrainian people. There obviously have been disruptions to life in Kyiv and other cities, but the Ukrainian people have been remarkably resilient. Is this continuing to have an impact? How long can the Ukrainian people tolerate this?
I think, a very long time. And think about Great Britain during the Blitz in World War II. Hitler thought that by just massively pummeling the Brits, he could crack the will of the civilian people. Didn't work out that way. And I would say there's a little whiff of Churchill when you look at Zelensky in this regard. He is very much a representative of his people. So look for Putin to continue this. And by the way, let's call this what it is. These are war crimes. When you attack theaters and maternity wards and shopping centers, civilian population centers, these are war crimes, and they are continuing. I think it'll be a failed strategy on the part of Putin, especially with those F-16s on station now.
Yeah, heartbreaking to see children in bomb shelters when they should be going to school and just enjoying their lives. Ukraine's defense minister at the Pentagon is at the Pentagon today, and the Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin continues to emphasize that the U.S. will support Ukraine. But officials in Kyiv say that Ukraine needs at least 130 of these F-16 fighter jets that you were talking about to fight Russia. I mean, how many do they have left? And can Ukraine's troops successfully fend off further Russian attacks if they don't get that support?
I think they will get that support. There are thousands of F-16 aircraft that are in the inventories of the United States. All are NATO allies, many other nations around the world. This jet, the F-16, is kind of Swiss Army knife. It can do air-to-air. It can do air-to-ground bombing kinds of runs, can do electronic warfare very well. Pretty simple to learn how to fly in the comparison with other more advanced jets. Very capable. I think ultimately they will end up with well over 100 of these coming from NATO, broadly speaking. I think that pipeline will continue. Final thought, Ryan. The other thing the Ukrainian foreign minister is talking to our defense minister, Lloyd Austin, about is gaining U.S. permission to conduct longer-range strikes inside Russian territory. Thus far, the U.S. has kind of held the Ukrainians back. I think the Ukrainians can lay out a pretty strong case. It's time to allow strikes 200 to 300 miles inside of Russia. Watch that space.